Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Baku, which goes down this weekend. We're in Azerbaijan. I don't think the UFC have ever been to Azerbaijan, so if I'm correct, it will be the first time in this country. Very excited for the card, and also the best part for me and the rest of the European MMA fan base is that the time of the event is at a super good time for us. I believe it's a 5 p.m. UK start time, which is just beautiful. It'll finish at about midnight, maybe 1 o'clock at the absolute latest in the morning, so really good time. Early start time for you guys over the pond in the States and in Canada. But like I say, really looking forward to the event. Great start time. Love the afternoon cards. And I just feel that these types of fight nights as well always bring out some really good fights. There's some really fun matchups as well. I genuinely think it's a well-matched card. And I'm like I say, I'm really looking forward to it, as you can probably tell with the tone of my voice. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMA Play 365. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler that likes written breakdowns so you can understand why we're justifying recommended bets. We've got that section for you. If you're someone that just wants to tail and follow the bets of a professional handicapper, then we've got an official bet section for you. That's where the professional handicapper's money has gone to, the professional handicapper being myself. And we've also got a fun parlay section for you guys that just like the long shot parlays. Whether you want us to build the parlays for you, we've got a pre-built parlay section, or whether you want to build your own parlays, make your own choices, we will have that in the parlay section as well, under parlay options, where you can just choose from any of the bets that we're recommending. That's win-loss, that's rounds, totals, overs, unders, prop bets, wins by knockout, submission, all that good stuff. And then of course, every single betting subscription comes with Blaydes AI, our UFC prediction software. You don't have to pay separately for it. We include everything together. We don't separate the subscriptions. Blaydes AI has been on absolute fire as well over the last few weeks. I keep saying it on every episode of the podcast, but Blaydes AI is just super impressive for me. It's picking some real good winners, some real good underdogs as well, like Kamaru Usman last week, for example. Blaydes AI had at 56%. There was one a couple of weeks ago, Ramiz Brahimaj, who was a massive underdog, that Blaydes AI actually had as the highest percentage prediction for that card, for the big underdog in Brahimaj. Brahimaj finished the fight in round 1. Blaydes AI also predicted that round 1 submission as well. So again, at MMA Play 365, everything's included in one betting subscription. It's all super affordable as well, as our ethos is that we want you to make your money back from what you spend with us as quickly as you possibly can, so you can start profiting on top of your bets. And we do that by making the packages affordable. Again, if you want to jump into the action, make sure you hit up MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out of the way, let's get down to breaking some fights. And of course, as always, we start in the main event. We've got 5 rounds in the UFC light heavyweight division between Jamahal Hill versus Khalil Rountree Jr. And it's an interesting fight because I kind of feel that, look, both fighters are super aggressive, super dangerous. They've both got knockout power. They've both got big wins in the UFC. They've both been on long winning streaks as well. But I kind of feel that both of these fighters maybe were in positions that they weren't quite ready for just yet. And I'm not saying they can't get back there and do well, but what I'm saying is, look, at the time Jamahal Hill was the champion, I still don't believe he was the best light heavyweight in the division, and that's no disrespect. I just think that there were a few light heavyweight fighters that were better than him, and of course that's rung true because he's no longer the champion and he's been beaten in his last 2 fights. But to his credit, he's been beaten by fighters that legitimately are at the top of that mountain in the division. Obviously, Magomed Ankalaev's the champion, but Alex Pereira was a long reign, and he kind of, he won a lot of title fights. Alex Pereira is a dangerous kickboxer, and then Yuri Prohaska, again, he's got flaws with sort of like an unorthodox style, but man, like the unorthodox style works for him. So when I say flaws, I just mean from like a raw technique perspective. Like if there was a rule book for kickboxing, some of the things that that Jiří Procházka does wouldn't be in that rule book, if that makes sense, but it works for him and he's a world-class fighter because of it. And then from Khalil Rountree's perspective, like, nobody can sit down and say that they weren't surprised when the UFC announced Alex Pereira versus Khalil Rountree for the UFC light heavyweight championship. Like, there was a lot of fighters that technically were ahead of Khalil Rountree in that, in that sort of list to be next up for the title fight. So again, no disrespect there. It's just it was a genuine surprise. Nobody saw Rountree as being that next title contender. And again, it kind of played out in the way that it should have played out. Like, Khalil Rountree gave a good account of himself against Alex Pereira, but he wasn't there to, he wasn't there in regards to the level of fighter to be able to beat an Alex Pereira. And the same thing with Jamahal Hill. But both fighters have got an opportunity now to sort of right the wrongs and get back up there. Again, I don't want this to come out in a disrespectful way. All I'm saying is I just don't think that right now Jamahal Hill is a UFC title level fighter, championship level fighter, as in I don't think he would be able to beat Magomed Ankalaev. And in fact, he lost against a fighter that's just lost against Magomed Ankalaev as well. And the same thing goes for Khalil Rountree, but they're both still like world-class fighters in the division. So it's an interesting fight. Now, I do feel that there's question marks on both sides here. Like, Jamahal Hill, like I say, he got up there, he became a UFC champion. Like, you can't take that away from him. It was very strange circumstances, but, in regards to other fighters not really being, available to take those fights at the top of the division. But Jamahal Hill became a UFC champion. He beat Glover Teixeira. And again, like, since then, he's just not looked like the fighter that he did look like on that run up to becoming the UFC champion. And I don't know whether sort of it peaked at some point or whether he's had a couple of off fights, but Jamahal Hill really didn't look too competitive against, like I say, Alex Pereira and Jiří Procházka, where, he was beaten and knocked out in both of those fights. But I still think there's something to be said for that run that Jamahal Hill had. He beat some good fighters. Like, I know there was a Thiago Santos and there was a Johnny Walker, and especially Johnny Walker, people might discredit that win. But, the level of fighters that Jamahal Hill was beating, there were step up in competitions every single time. It's not as if he got a title fight off fighting lower level fighters, or lower ranked fighters than himself. It was always a step up in competition. It was always the right next move, and he got his opportunity and took it. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Now, with Khalil Rountree, on the other hand, again, I don't want to discredit the win streak, but you look at the fighters that Khalil Rountree has beaten in his win streak before he got the title fight. And again, I don't want to discredit, but the fighters that he'd been beating up until that title fight were just, well, I'll go through them. Look, we've got Modestas Bukauskas, who after that fight got cut by the UFC, he went back to Cage Warriors, became a champion and got a second call up to the UFC. Then Carl Roberson no longer with the UFC. Dustin Jacoby, to be fair to Dustin Jacoby, is a fighter that I've always liked, but is he up there within the top 3, top 5 in the division? Well, absolutely not. Chris Daukaus, no longer with the UFC. Anthony Smith, took that harsh decline and then is now subsequently retired from fighting. And then Rountree gets the title fight based off that. Now, again, look, a 5-fight win streak in the UFC light heavyweight division is super impressive, but when you really dissect it, the fighters that Rountree were beating aren't, in that conversation of being in the top 3 or 5 in the division. So again, this was why a lot of people were surprised to an extent, because look, like I say, a 5-fight win streak's great, but to have a title shot off the names that he was beating is the reason why we were surprised. Now, with how this fight plays out, I think that, look, you're not going to get too many takedowns in this fight. I think there's a high probability that this fight's won and lost on the feet. If there is takedowns, I just don't think anything's going to be significant enough to make the fight swing to being won and lost with, a wrestling or grappling performance from either fighter. Both fighters are predominantly strikers, and I expect that to be where the fight plays out. And they've both got a very different striking style. Like, I feel Jamahal Hill's very tall, long, sniper, straight down the middle, will look to use movement, and, he's got a bit of an orthodox movement himself, whereas Khalil Rountree is more aggressive, overwhelming, loves to get in his opponent's face, looks for the big shots to knock his opponent out. And that's where part of me is concerned for Jamahal Hill, because if Jamahal Hill doesn't work on the mistakes he made in his previous fights in regards to, not moving his head off the centre line, being relatively hittable, keeping his head there. And he was sort of over-reliant on his strikes being a massive factor to the point where I'm sure he wasn't expecting too much coming back because of how good of an offensive striker he is. But the reality is, at this level in MMA, you are going to get hit back because fighters are at a certain quality where, you're going to need more than just relying on your offense being so dominant that there's not going to be too much defense coming back. And I think with Khalil Rountree, again, he's got to be careful of getting hit by Hill. But if Hill's not got that head off the centre line, then Khalil Rountree could land something that knocks Hill out. Now, I'm not going to put too much stock into, okay, Hill's chinny, he's been knocked out in his last 2 fights. I'm not going to put too much stock into that because the bottom line is both of these fighters have been knocked out in this division, and both of them in a very heavy division in the UFC as well, where knockouts happen. Like, I can remember a couple of years ago, the biggest percentage of knockouts in a calendar year in the UFC was in the light heavyweight division. So these guys have got the power of a heavyweight, but then they've got the speed and the movement, and it's a dangerous combination, which is a reason why the percentage of knockouts in the light heavyweight division is usually very high. So I genuinely think that, look, Jamahal Hill could knock Rountree out. I think Rountree could knock Hill out. So it's sort of the intricacies in between when you really dissecting it. And I feel that when you're looking at volume, Jamahal Hill's got way more volume, or outputs way more volume than Khalil Rountree. Khalil Rountree, again, not only is the volume sort of relatively low at 3.73 strikes landed per minute, but he also statistically gets hit more than he lands on his opponent, so he absorbs more strikes than he dishes out. And again, that's always a stat that is very interesting to me, because I feel like when you're getting hit, especially in this division, if you're getting hit more than you're landing on your opponent, then you're in big trouble. So I think that the fight's going to be close. I think it's going to be competitive. I think it's volatile, which is probably the right descriptive adjective for this fight, because I genuinely think that either fighter could land a knockout here. But when you're looking at the stats and the attributes of each fighter, I like the sniper shots from Jamahal Hill. I think the movement in regards to the footwork is a little bit better and will suit him more for a fighter that's quite static in Khalil Rountree. I think the volume plays a massive factor in here as well, because if Jamahal Hill is landing more than Khalil Rountree, then again, mathematically, the knockout upside is probably more on the side of Jamahal Hill. And the other side to this is, I think that Jamahal Hill only losing to Alex Pereira and Jiří Procházka, I'm just not ready to write him off yet. And I know a lot of people, shit on Jamahal Hill and have got certain opinions of him. I don't care about those opinions when it comes to, predictions, bets, all that sort of good stuff. I just think that Jamahal Hill losing to Pereira and Jiří Procházka, most fighters will lose to those two. I mean, Khalil Rountree's already lost against one. You put Rountree against Procházka, I think Procházka beats Rountree as well. So I do think the fight is close and competitive. I do think it's volatile, but until Jamahal Hill does go on this obvious decline and is losing against fighters that you wouldn't have typically imagined him losing against prior to the Glover Teixeira fight, for example, I still think that there's a fighter in there, and Jamahal Hill's just took 2 losses against 2 fighters that would beat the majority of the division anyway. I think from an actual skill set perspective, Jamahal Hill is the slightly better mixed martial artist in this fight, and it's for those reasons I'm picking Jamahal Hill to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Rafael Fiziev versus Ignacio Bahamondes. Rafael Fiziev, one of 3 fighters on this card that were born in Azerbaijan, so he's absolutely going to get the home crowd behind him. Very surprised, actually, the UFC didn't make this a featured co-main event with it being 5 rounds. Obviously, I might have just misworded that. People might have misunderstood. This fight isn't 5 rounds. I'm surprised the UFC didn't make it a featured co-main event. It is only 3 rounds. I would have liked to have seen 5. But yeah, look, it's an interesting fight because you've got a fighter in Fiziev who's super technical, super skilled, at this point been in and around the top of the division for many years. And then you've got Ignacio Bahamondes, who's, a young fighter rising up, and he's earned this shot at Rafael Fiziev. Like, Ignacio Bahamondes, he had a bit of a start in the UFC where a few people were unsure, but man, like I say, he's done the business and he's earned himself a co-main event on a fight night in Azerbaijan against somebody like Rafael Fiziev that's fought some of the best fighters in the division and been at the top of the division for a while. Now, it's really interesting with the line movement as well. Fiziev started the slight favourite and then he was hanging around at that slight favourite line, and then suddenly it's closed back into a pick'em, and on some books they have Bahamondes now the slight favourite. So the line's almost flipping, and I kind of feel there is a lot of uncertainty with this fight, and it's one of these fights where, you know, you've got that UFC veteran that's super skilled, that's been around the top, but you kind of know Fiziev's ceiling now. Like Fiziev, in regards to his ceiling, you know, he's still an outstanding world-class fighter, but he just at this point looks like he's never going to touch UFC gold. He's never going to be in and around that conversation. But that doesn't make him a bad fighter. For me, he's still a legitimate fighter in the division, super dangerous, super skilled. But we just know his ceiling. So it's one of these fights where we've got a fighter that now knows his ceiling's probably not going to be within the UFC Championship versus an upcoming fighter that's been doing super well, but now he's got a massive step up in competition, and it's the right step up in competition, but is he good enough to beat that UFC vet, the skilled, you know, the skilled, experienced fighter? And that's normally where the books are undecided because of obviously public money. You can have half of the people that are going to say, oh, well, Fiziev is the UFC vet, he's still super skilled, he's not declining, and he's going to put on, you know, a veteran performance against Bahamondes. But then you're going to have the other half of the public saying, well, no, like Fiziev's had his moment. Now it's Bahamondes. Bahamondes is this young fighter. He's up and coming. He's going to show that he's at this level. You're literally going to have a public that's split two ways here, and you know, you can genuinely make an argument both ways. Like Ignacio Bahamondes is going to have a massive height advantage, reach advantage, leg reach advantage. He's going to be very fast. He's going to be very active inside the cage. But the thing is, Bahamondes, as tricky as it can be from a grappling perspective, the likelihood is he is predominantly going to be striking in this fight. And with Fiziev, like, even though Bahamondes has got some good physical advantages in this fight, like I say, with the height, the reach, the range, it's going to be nothing that Fiziev's not dealt with and fought before. Like, I mean, in the UFC, Bahamondes might be the tallest person that he's fought, but Fiziev will have trained with guys that are tall. He'll have fought them in, you know, in his Muay Thai background as well. Like, I just don't believe that Fiziev's skills and quality is going to allow Bahamondes to win this fight just because he's tall, long and rangy. Like, Fiziev will find ways to, you know, he'll have a game plan to get inside and work him. And like I say, you've got two sides to this. You've got the young, hungry prospect that's upcoming. You can make a case for that fighter. And then you've got the experienced vet who is an elite, who has got an elite skill set. And with Fiziev's case, within the striking, in a fight that I think is going to be won and lost on the feet striking. So you can make an argument for that side as well. But I'm going to be on the camp of the experienced vet here. I don't think Fiziev's declining. I just feel that he's now probably figured out his ceiling, but that doesn't mean it. Like I say, it doesn't mean he's a bad fighter. I'm not seeing like huge declines from Fiziev where he's getting knocked, rocked, wobbled all over the place, losing against lower or being super competitive with lower level fighters. The guys that Fiziev is fighting are the best of the best. If he's losing fights, it's against the best of the best. I don't see a harsh decline for Fiziev. I think Bahamondes is going to come into this fight super confident, get his speed moving, get his movement going, start trying to land strikes. But I think that when you look at the raw skill set versus skill set, I think there's a level here where Fiziev's a level above with the striking, and I think it could potentially turn Bahamondes into the wrestling. But again, it's not easy to wrestle and grapple Fiziev. Like, Fiziev will be able to, you know, to make fights play out on the feet if he needs them to play out on the feet. And I think this is going to be one of these fights, and I just feel that Bahamondes is going to come into this fight full of confidence, feel that he's got Fiziev, he's got Fiziev figured out, he knows what to do, but then not taking into consideration that Fiziev's going to have a plan for somebody like him as well. And I just think it's going to start working for Fiziev in the cage, and Bahamondes is just going to very, very slowly start running out of ideas, and then Fiziev's just going to put on that veteran performance. So that, for me, is the side and the camp that I'm leaning towards. For those reasons, I'm picking Rafael Fiziev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight that's been, I think this is the third time it's been booked. We've got Curtis Blaydes versus the UFC newcomer, hopefully still making his UFC debut, Rizvan Kuniev. Now, the first time this fight was booked, I think they moved the location, and then it was booked, and I think it was Blaydes that pulled out with an illness. But like I say, hopefully they both make it into the cage on the weekend and everything's fine. Now, look, with Rizvan Kuniev, he's a bit of a strange one, because from a skill versus skill perspective, Curtis Blaydes, for me, should be pretty much head and shoulders above him, especially when it comes to the wrestling. But the issue that I've got with Curtis Blaydes is, there was once upon a time where he would just wrestle. Like, you look at that Volkov fight, he was absolutely shattered, late round 4 and into round 5 because of, he's basically a heavyweight version of Merab Dvalishvili, or he was. And as a heavyweight, like, the fact that he was able to have the gas tank and cardio to keep going for as long as he did was super impressive. Blaydes always had that attitude of, you know exactly who I am as a fighter, you know exactly what I'm going to try and do to you inside the cage, try and stop it. And he had that arrogance about him, and I loved that. Like, anybody that's been following MMA Play 365 and myself for many years, even back into the Newsome MMA days, knows what, how much I like Curtis Blaydes. I predicted him to be a UFC champion a long time ago. That kind of didn't work out, but, he got close. He was ranked in the top 2 in the division at one point. So I've always really liked Curtis Blaydes, but he's kind of come away from fighting that smart way, and I don't know whether what happened in the Derek Lewis fight has maybe tweaked things in regards to how he operates with the wrestling, because in that fight he was doing pretty well striking against Derek Lewis. Obviously, Derek Lewis has always got that dangerous one-punch knockout shot, and it wasn't until Blaydes actually shot for a takedown that Lewis timed the counter and knocked him out badly, like it was a rough knockout. And I don't know whether Blaydes is just super hesitant now of shooting too many takedowns in case somebody times it again. And you can understand why, if I'm right in saying that. But something's changed with Blaydes. Like, even when he went in there with Pavlovich, like, his one way to really win that fight was to shoot takedowns, and he just didn't. He stood striking, he got knocked out. So I just don't know what's happened with Blaydes. I find it, at one point, I was talking about how trustworthy he is. You know that he's going to shoot takedowns. You know that he's going to operate in his game plan, in his world. And now I don't know. I just don't have that trust anymore. I'm a little bit unsure. Now, with Kuniev, I don't think Kuniev's the most technically, skilled fighter, and especially when you compare him to a Curtis Blaydes. Like, Kuniev actually does a pretty good job, but I don't know. For this fight, I'm going to reserve myself the right to change my pick based on the weigh-ins. And the reason I'm saying that, I went into a little bit more detail last time on the previous breakdown when these two were supposed to fight before, and I'll re-go over it again. Now, Kuniev fought in the Contender Series. He was one of these heavyweights that, has got a bit of blubber on the midsection. Obviously still very much in shape from a physical perspective, like he's fighting at the top of the sport. But some of these heavyweights do carry a bit of extra weight, and Kuniev was one of them. Looked okay on the Contender Series, got a 3rd round finish. Then he doesn't get signed by the UFC. He goes into the PFL and he fights Renan Ferreira, who is at the top of the pack in the PFL. I mean, outside of your Francis Ngannou right now. But, Renan Ferreira is one of the best heavyweight MMA fighters in the world, period. So I'm not saying the best, but definitely one of them. Just because he's in the UFC doesn't mean he's one of the best, he's not one of the best fighters. So Kuniev goes in there against Renan Ferreira. But that body type is different. He's absolutely stacked, looks shredded. Like, he just looks like a completely different human being. Goes in there and beats Renan Ferreira. Like, really, really good win. But then he pops with USADA. So now we're thinking, well, was the body type difference? Was the aggression and the way he fought, related to him popping under USADA? Maybe. Then he goes into the Contender Series again for his second time after the PFL fight, and he's back to looking like what he was the first time in the Contender Series. Didn't look ripped and shredded like the PFL. And then you're thinking, well, now we're putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4. It clearly was because, something was in his system. He popped by USADA. And now, like I say, and he got a win and a finish again in the Contender Series, so you can't take that away from him. But I just think the performances were very different depending on that body type. And again, even though we're putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4, that doesn't mean that Kuniev had that performance against Ferreira because of it. It's just there's a high likelihood of it. So what's then strange is the last time that these two fighters were built up to fight each other, I didn't see any sort of top-off pictures with Kuniev, but I saw pictures of him in a rash guard. And bear in mind, rash guards will reveal absolutely everything. If you've got some unwanted weight in a rash guard, it will show the world that there's some unwanted weight under that rash guard. But Kuniev didn't look like that. Kuniev looked big again. So it's going to be one of them where I feel that once Kuniev's on the scales and we see what type of shape he's in, will probably be the reason why I either stick with my pick or change my pick. I think Curtis Blaydes, from a technical standpoint, is the better MMA fighter, but I'm finding Curtis Blaydes a little bit hard to trust. I think he's on a little bit of a decline, and Kuniev could be that fighter if he's in the good shape on the scales, if his body's in a ripped state, really looking in shape, super athletic. I think that version of Kuniev, the Kuniev that fought Hernan Ferreira, beats Curtis Blaydes. So that's where I'm currently at. I think that Blaydes is the better technical fighter from a skill set perspective, but on a decline, whereas Kuniev smack bang in his prime. But again, if it's the Contender Series version of Kuniev, which is a little less, a little more underwhelming, shall we say, I think Curtis Blaydes beats that version of Kuniev. But if this is the version of Kuniev that fought Ferreira, then man, I think that version of Kuniev beats Curtis Blaydes. So it's a bit of a tough one. I think it's hard to be super confident. I suppose even when you look at Kuniev on the scales as well, like it's still gonna, like if he's in really good shape, you've still got to consider that Curtis Blaydes is probably the better mixed martial artist. It's just, is Kuniev in a slightly better place right now? It's just a tough one for me, real tough one. I'm going to side with Kuniev for the sake of the podcast, just because, like I say, I've got a little less trust in Curtis Blaydes now. I don't think he works to his game plan like he used to. I think Kuniev's probably smack bang in his prime. Good gym, good training partners, but like I say, if it's the Dana White Contender Series version of Kuniev, I do think he gets beat. But one more time, I am reserving myself the right to change this pick. But for now, it's Rizvan Kuniev to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is going to be a fun fight. I'm really looking forward to this. It's solid matchmaking from the UFC. We've got Myktybek Orolbai versus the UFC newcomer Tofiq Musayev. Now, Tofiq Musayev is the second out of the 3 fighters from Azerbaijan. The UFC have signed him predominantly for this card, but the guy's 35, but he's super experienced. He's been around Bellator, Rising, and he's a fighter that, in my opinion, is UFC caliber. Absolutely UFC caliber. Like, there's no question about it. It's just, at what UFC caliber? Is he going to beat fighters in the top 10, 15? Well, that remains to be seen. But he's definitely going to win fights in the UFC. Like, he's better than the mid-range, the mid-range roster in the UFC, in this UFC division. Now, Myktybek Orolbai is an interesting opponent, though, because he's a guy that's big, powerful. He's a fighter that can relentlessly wrestle, but he's, like I say, he's got power in his hands when he does let them go. The one area of concern with Orolbai is the cardio. Can tire out if he's working super hard earlier in the fight, but he's one of them fighters that will usually get ahead by 2 rounds, and then that 3rd round he's just in survival mode. As long as he doesn't get finished, he doesn't lose the fight. But when we saw in his last fight against Mateusz Rebecki, when he's in a fight against an opponent that is absolutely going to match him offensively and defensively, and it's back and forth and high pace, then Orolbai can get got at. We saw that in the last fight. Now with Musayev is more of a striker, but he does have wrestling and some topside grappling. So it's going to be the bit that I'm a little bit unsure about here is how effective is Orolbai's wrestling going to be against Musayev? Because we haven't seen Musayev deal with too much in regards to defensive wrestling. Now, if Musayev can get taken down, I think Orolbai is going to have a real good time here, because when we talk about the pace of fights, like the Rebetsky fight was a stupid high pace, whereas with Musayev's got power, he's a solid striker, but he's not a fighter that's going to put like 100-mile-an-hour pace on you. He's a fighter that will slowly close the distance, will stalk you, will slowly push you back. He's not someone that's going to be flying around the cage constantly. So Orolbai, I think will have to mind his P's and Q's. He'll have to understand that he's going to be on the back foot for some of this fight, but he's not going to be constantly like running away and trying to evade like a massive constant onslaughts with 100 punch combinations or anything like that. He's just going to have to mind his P's and Q's and keep defensive, circle back out, get back into the center of the cage. But like I say, the unknown for me, it's not much of an unknown, it's a wait and see game in regards to Musayev's takedown defense. Is he going to be good enough to hold up against a relentless Orolbai? And I don't know. I just feel that Orolbai's done it in the UFC that's at a higher level that Musayev's fought before. And I think that from a striking perspective, Musayev is definitely going to be the more dangerous striker in this fight. Like, Orolbai, for me, has got to wrestle. Not that he can't hang with striking with Musayev, but Musayev does pack a lot of power in his punches. And then the other side to this as well is Musayev is 35 years old. Can his cardio hang with an Orolbai that is going to put on a massive pressure on him? Like, the thing is with Rebetsky in the last fight is Rebetsky's cardio ended up taking over, whereas Musayev, if he's constantly dealing with takedown after takedown after takedown on his UFC debut at 35 years old, is his cardio really gonna surpass Orolbai's, like when he gets to around 3 and Musayev needs the knockout to win the fight? I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns in this fight, because I know Musayev is at a high level within MMA, but I just don't know whether the style of Orolbai is just going to be an absolute nightmare for him. And I kind of am leaning towards that, because I know that Orolbai is a nightmare opponent for a lot of fighters. I know he lost against Rebetsky, but he still caused a lot of problems himself in that fight. Like, Orolbai is a problem. He can wrestle heavily, relentlessly, good topside grappler as well, got submissions, got ground and pound, and he can strike, and he's also huge for the division as well. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going with what I know in this fight, and I know that Orolbai is a problem for a lot of fighters. I just don't know yet if Musayev's style will be able to hold up in regards to defense, to be able to be solid defensively so he can get his own offense going. Orolbai's definitely got to mind his P's and Q's. He didn't get hit with something hard. But like I say, I'm going with what I know. And I know that Orolbai is a problem just a general problem with the style of fighter that he is for most opponents. So for those reasons, I'm picking Myktybek Orolbai to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nazim Sadykhov versus Nikolas Motta. Nazim Sadykhov being 3 of 3 of the fighters from Azerbaijan on this card. So again, going to have a huge pop from the crowd for sure. Now, it's a bit of an interesting one from my perspective, because I've never been overly high on Nazim Sadykhov. And I'm not saying he's a bad fighter. I've just never been like overly impressed from a UFC caliber perspective. Whereas with Nikolas Motta, I was super impressed with him before he came to the UFC, and then that sort of got taken away, and I was a bit like, okay, well, maybe he's not as efficient as I thought he was going to be in the UFC. Now, again, there's no disrespect for what I've said either side. Both of them are UFC caliber fighters. Both of them have put wins together in the UFC. It's just when I'm being overly critical like this, I'm looking at potential top 10, 15, and I just don't think that that's where I always look. When I'm saying I've not been massively high on a fighter, I mean high as in like I don't think that the top 10, 15 of the division is where they're going to be. But of course, both fighters can make improvements, and we talk constantly about like a Jan Blachowicz, for example. Nobody thought he would ever become a UFC champion a number of years ago, and he did. So anything can happen. It's just right now, I think that it is a relatively well-matched fight. I think that both fighters are going to be competitive with each other. Like with Nikolas Motta, he's actually on a 2-fight win streak now, so he looks to have turned a little bit of a corner. Nazim Sadykhov on a win streak as well. He hasn't lost in the UFC either. Like, the only fight that was a notch on his record was the draw against Vyacheslav Borshev, which, to be fair, wasn't the greatest look for Sadykhov, if I'm being honest. But aside from that, Sadykhov's like done okay in the UFC. He's beaten the fighters that have been put in front of him. And to be fair, one of those fighters was Ismail Bonfim, which he knocked out in round 1. So, and I actually think that's the reason why he's got the price tag he's got, because he's like -400, -425. He's a very big favourite against Motta, and I think Motta's way too live for the odds that he's got. Obviously, the public will have been smacking some money on Sadykhov as well. He'll be in parlays, but I just don't think that. Look, for someone that's -400, -450, or whatever it is, around that number, in my opinion, they have to be a level above their opponent. There has to be an obvious level gap there for a fighter to be that high of or that wide of a favourite. And I just don't. Look, Sadykhov might be better than Motta, and spoiler alert, I'm picking Sadykhov to win the fight, but I don't think that he's that clear and obvious level above Motta where he should be a -400 favourite. So look, if you are looking to bet this fight and you're looking for underdogs, Motta might not be the worst option as an underdog. I do think Sadykhov wins. I don't think he covers the -400. I do think he might look maybe -200, but I don't think that he's going to put on like a super dominant performance where Motta is just completely out of his depth, which is what you would expect from someone that's a -400, -450 favourite. So, like I say, from how the fight plays out, the reason why Sadykhov is probably, well, should be an obvious favourite. Like I say, if he was like -200, -225, I think that would be more suited to where Sadykhov's at. From a striking perspective, it's going to be close and competitive, but he can get the better of Motta striking. I think his wrestling and grappling is probably going to be more offensively better than Motta's as well. Motta has been put on his back and kept there in a couple of fights, and I think Sadykhov could replicate that. But Motta's down to scrap, and so Sadykhov. When Sadykhov's coming and being aggressive on the feet and swinging, Motta will happily stay in the pocket and exchange with Sadykhov. And we've seen Sadykhov hurt, just like we've seen Motta hurt. So this is what I mean. I think the fight's going to be more competitive than the betting line suggests, but I do agree with Sadykhov being a favourite. It's just he should be a bit of a shorter favourite than what he is. I think that, when you're looking at the grand scheme of things, he's probably got a slight edge in more areas, in more of the disciplines within MMA of Motta, and that's the reason why I do like him to win. I just think the line's a little wide. But for those reasons, I'm picking Nazim Sadykhov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Muhammad Naimov versus Bogdan Grad. Now, I actually think that, look, with what I've just said with Sadykhov, that the line's too wide, he probably should be like -225. I actually think the opposite here. Like, Muhammad Naimov's like -225. I think he could easily be like -400. Like, I think this is a real bad stylistic fight for someone like Bogdan Grad. Like, Naimov's, take away all the skill set that he's got, just from a physical perspective, he's very big and strong for the division, so it's very hard for fighters to really look great against Naimov, and he's one of these fighters that will generally just be difficult to fight. But he's also got knockout power, he's also got good wrestling, he's got good topside grappling. He's beaten better fighters than Bogdan Grad. Like, look at the Nathaniel Wood fight, for example. Like, Nathaniel Wood's head and shoulders above Bogdan Grad, and Naimov beat Nathaniel Wood pretty much everywhere. So it's like I say, I just think it's a horrible fight for Bogdan Grad. I think that Naimov should probably be a bigger favourite. I think that he's gonna have advantages in a lot of places, and a lot, like, from the wrestling and grappling, I wouldn't say he's overly like super skilled from a skill set perspective there, but he's good enough. But what helps him is, like I say, that the physical attributes, the strength, the power, just being able to be a solid heavy blanket on top of his opponents. The only fight that Naimov's really dropped, I suppose, is that fight against Felipe Lima. It was a short notice UFC debut, upper weight class. I actually bet Lima as an underdog in that fight, and Naimov was beating Lima. He was doing really well against Lima, but Lima turned it around late in the fight and finished him. So that's actually, for me, though, not a massive knock on Naimov, because I do think Felipe Lima is a very, very skilled fighter, a very underrated fighter, a fighter that is about to surge in the UFC, in my opinion. We just haven't seen it yet, but I do think in 2 to 3 fights of Felipe Lima, we're going to be thinking, okay, well, yeah, that surge was obvious. And it started from that Naimov fight, in my opinion. But outside of that fight, Naimov's just looked good in the UFC. Got wins, like I said, over Nathaniel Wood, over Jamie Malarkey, two really solid fighters there, and then done what he needed to do against the other opponents that were slightly lesser on the skill set level. But like I say, in regards to like Bogdan Grad's one of these fighters that does have an all-round style. He can strike, he can wrestle, he can grapple. I just don't know where and how he's going to be overly effective against Naimov in any of those areas. Like, from a striking perspective, Grad might do okay, but Naimov's just going to put hard punches together, crash the pocket, look for takedowns, and then Bogdan Grad's going to have to work defensively. And I just feel that, again, the strength and the power of Naimov is going to be a first line of takedown offense, and once he's got Grad on his back, I think that Grad's going to have a super tough time getting him off, and he might stand up once or twice, but I just think that the aggression of Naimov coming forwards, landing hard punches, forcing Grad on the back foot so that Naimov can then level change if he needs to, I just feel that he's going to have a lot of things going his way in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Muhammad Naimov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Seokhyeon Ko. Definitely butchered that name. I'm going to stick to Ko after this introduction, versus Oban Elliott. So Ko was supposed to fight a few weeks ago against Billy Goff. That fight was cancelled, and the UFC have rebooked Ko against Oban Elliott. Now, the unfortunate aspect for Ko is I think Ko's got a much harder task ahead of him in Oban Elliott than he did against Billy Goff. I actually liked Ko against Goff, and I thought he would have done well, but here I think that Oban Elliott's... I actually, do you know what? Like, credit where credit's due. When Oban Elliott came into the UFC, I was a little bit unsure, because I thought he may not be UFC caliber, and we'll find out. And he had a bit of a sort of wayward start, but man, I feel like Oban Elliott's like kicked into a different gear in regards to the development. He's looking like a fighter now that's super well rounded, that's a solid striker, solid wrestler, solid grappler. He's turned into one of those fighters that at a certain level in the UFC he's going to be very difficult to beat, because he's not got the defensive holes that, again, fighters in this sort of mid-range tier in the division are going to be able to actually get at him and beat him comfortably in any specific area. I think if you throw Oban Elliott in the top 10, top 15 right now, I think he's competitive, but I do think, a lot of those opponents will be able to beat him, at least right now. But like I say, the development's kicked in, and he's improving at a rapid rate from fight to fight. And I think Ko is going to be one of these fighters in that mid-range tier, maybe a little bit lower, and I just don't see where he's going to get at Oban Elliott. Like, Ko's got, from a striking perspective, he's quite stoic, he's reactive, he's got power in his strikes, but I don't think he's going to be as active as Oban Elliott. I don't think he's going to be, elusive enough to make Oban Elliott like chase him, miss strikes. I think that Oban Elliott's going to be there to really put on a good performance here. And then when you're looking at the wrestling and grappling, I think Oban Elliott's just at a completely different level there as well. So it's one of these fights for Ko that, unfortunately, I just don't know where he beats Elliott. Like, sure, they wear 4-ounce gloves and they're fighting at the highest level in the UFC, so there's always that puncher's chance. But I just don't think that there's it's a high probability. I think, yes, he could catch Oban Elliott, and it's always possible, but the reality is I think Oban Elliott's just going to be better everywhere, be the better striker, wrestler, grappler, the fighter that's got, that's putting the pedal to the metal, putting the foot on the gas, super aggressive, putting the pressure on, forward movement. And I think Ko is just going to be on the back foot a lot in this fight, and I think he's going to run out of ideas, with Oban Elliott just looking like he's flourishing as the minutes go by and as the rounds go by. I wouldn't be shocked at a knockout with Elliott. I wouldn't be shocked at a submission for Elliott, and I wouldn't be shocked at a decision win for Elliott. I kind of feel like he's got all aspects covered in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Oban Elliott to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting one. We've got Ismail Naurdiev versus Jung Park. Now, again, Jung Park's a fighter that, I've bet against quite a lot in the UFC, been successful more often than not. It's normally the plus money side that I take against Park. Like, I respect Park's game. I think that, he does a serviceable job, but when he's fighting a relatively dynamic fighter, and a fighter that does have, win conditions against him, which, a lot of fighters will have because of Park's style, then I think that once that's the plus money side, that's where I've been successful. And with Ismail Naurdiev, actually, he's plus money against Jung Park. The issue is with Naurdiev is I was relatively critical of him on his return to the UFC. So this is his second stint in the UFC, and he came back and he fought Bruno Silva. And when I watched the tape of what happened since he was last in the UFC to his second UFC debut, I saw that there was a fighter that was still, he still had holes that were still there. They were a little bit unpatched still. What happens a lot is these fighters get cut from the UFC, go back to fighting outside the UFC. They make the improvements, the developments, the necessary changes in the fighting career with whatever that may be, and then patch up holes and come back looking like a real revised version of themselves, where they're the cleaner, better, more experienced. And some of that does run true for Naurdiev, but there was a lot of okay, well, he's still on the back foot a lot. He's still open to getting hit a lot. He was getting hurt in the fights outside of the UFC. And, to his credit, he was still getting wins in a lot of them. But like I say, there was still some uncertainty there with Naurdiev. Now, he came into the fight against Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva, didn't show up, or Naurdiev absolutely battered him, whichever way you wanna go with it. And Naurdiev looked really good, but you do have to take into consideration that Bruno Silva has hit that harsh decline. I think that was his 5th fight that he'd lost in a row, or he's on a 5-fight losing streak now. So again, that win for Naurdiev didn't age too great when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, but that doesn't say he's a bad fighter. And again, with Jung Yong Park, he's very meat and potatoes. And what I mean by that is everything is to the book, everything is simple, but it's effective. Simplicity does work in this game. You've got, if somebody has a good jab, look at Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland's got an amazing jab. Jab's probably one of the most simplest strikes that you can throw in martial arts. But again, it's a simple strike that if you can make it effective and efficient, it works for you. And Park's got that sort of style. He's very technical, keeps things very tight. He's a closed book and in that regard, and will just land his simple strikes, won't do anything too flashy, won't overcommit or overexert. When it comes to the wrestling, he can grind. He'll keep, if he can't take you down, he'll just keep you against the cage, running the clock down. If he does take you down, then he's a blanket on top. So Park does a lot of things okay, but the thing is with Naurdiev, he's got a little bit of flair about him. Now, again, it's hard to know exactly where Naurdiev's at, just because, if Bruno Silva had gone on a 2-fight win streak after Naurdiev had beaten him, for example, then it'd be different. But looking at Bruno Silva, he's likely done in the UFC now, and he's a shell of his former self, and Naurdiev caught that shell of Bruno Silva rather than the best of Bruno Silva. So there's still, in my head, some concerns with Naurdiev, but again, when it comes to Jung Yong Park, I just feel that he's a beatable fighter. If someone's got good movement, good striking, in and out of range, can defend takedowns, can scramble back up to the feet if they are taken down, and just outwork Park more than anything else, those types of fighters can beat Park. That's a win condition, and I feel Naurdiev's got that. I still think that he's waiting for the breakthrough moment in the UFC, but Park's not like a top 10, 15 guy that he's going to have to fight the best fight of his life to beat him. I think Naurdiev, if he does the right things, in and out of range, using speed, using movement, not be there to be hit, but land and get out, I just think he can do a point scoring job on Park. And again, when it comes to a finish, I don't know, but I genuinely think that from just a generalistic work perspective, Naurdiev can outwork Park. I think it's a fight that should be much closer to a pick'em. If Jung Yong Park was maybe minus 120, minus 125 as the slight favourite, then I'd understand it, but that's not the case. When you're looking at the live odds right now at the time of recording, you've got Park out there at minus 225 at some books, so you've got Naurdiev at plus 175 at some books, and I just think it's too wide. If we had, again, just to reiterate, if we had Park at minus 125 with Naurdiev at plus 100 or plus 110, then yeah, those odds make sense. But I think the odds are too wide for a fighter that I do think that can be beaten in Jung Yong Park if the opponent's got certain win conditions, which I think Naurdiev probably has. So yeah, for me, slightly siding with Naurdiev, more just because the betting line's wide, but I do think that he's got paths to victory in this fight. I think Park can be got at. I mean, like I say, he's a good, efficient fighter, but those good efficient fighters can normally, like I say, they can be got at. They're not unbeatable, and I think Naurdiev might be able to get the job done here. I'm picking Ismail Naurdiev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a rematch. We've got Darya Zheleznyakova versus Melissa Mullins 2. Yeah, that's a mouthful as well, and I will go with Zheleznyakova for the remainder of this breakdown, but I'll try and make it short and snappy, because I really don't want to be saying that name too often. But look, it's a rematch from Aries, not from the UFC, so before both fighters got signed to the UFC, and it was Melissa Mullins that finished the fight in round 1. So I actually think that Melissa Mullins has developed. I think they both got better, to be fair, since that fight. I think they're both a better version of themselves, but I don't think Zheleznyakova has got significantly better where she's surpassed Melissa Mullins. I still think Melissa Mullins is probably going to be better everywhere here. I think from a striking perspective, that's where it's going to be a little bit closer, because Zheleznyakova can strike. But I think Mullins has got the advantages with getting the fight down to the mat. She's got good takedowns. She can get her opponents down. And when she's on top, Mullins has got a real nasty top game. She's not one of these fighters that's just going to lay on top and run the clock down. Mullins will get into a position where she wants to land strikes. She wants to hit you ground and pound. If you deliver a submission opportunity, she'll look to try and snap that up as well. But that's where Mullins did Zheleznyakova last time, and I just feel that for Zheleznyakova to give herself the best chance of winning, she's got to keep the fight standing. She's got to defend the takedowns and hope that she can put on a better striking performance than Mullins. And I just think that although the fight's much closer on the feet than it is on the mat, I still think Mullins has got a nasty tie game where she's going to be able to get at Zheleznyakova, be super aggressive, because this is the other thing. Zheleznyakova likes the time, the space to be able to dictate the pace and the range. Mullins will just be in your face, she'll overwhelm you, she'll get in there, she'll lob strikes at you, really try to hurt you, crash the pocket, body lock, takedown, ground and pound. That's a game, and that's how she got at Zheleznyakova last time, and I ironically think that's exactly how she's going to get it at this time as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Melissa Mullins to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Irina Alekseeva versus Claudio Segula. It's been a while since we've seen Alekseeva, the Russian Ronda, and I wonder what she's been doing, where she's been. Is she being injured? Is she been developing? Could be many things. I haven't really looked into it, but Claudio Segula isn't a fighter that I'm overly impressed with, if I'm being honest. Like, outside of the UFC, she's very aggressive, likes to come forwards, looks like she had a decent topside game, but when she came into the UFC, she fought Melissa Mullins on a UFC debut, and she just got found out. Like, the level difference outside of the UFC to inside of the UFC is very apparent, and Segula was just another example of that. Now with Irina Alekseeva, I just think that she's going to be better than Segula everywhere. I think if Segula tries to be aggressive striking with Alekseeva will welcome it. But then when it comes to the takedowns, like, Alekseeva, I think, can get Claudio Segula down just like Mullins got her down, and do good work on top of Segula just like Mullins did on Segula. The thing is with Segula, she's very much, in regards to the grappling, a top side player rather than bottom side. When she's on her back, she just looked like she were out of options. And granted, like I've just said, Mullins has got a good top side game, so maybe she was just out of her depth there. But I think Alekseeva's also got a good topside game as well. So I kind of feel on the feet, Alekseeva's got her covered. And then when it comes to the takedowns, I'd be very surprised if Segula got Alekseeva down. If there is anybody on top, I think it's more likely to be Alekseeva. And then, like I say, Claudio Segula can get a bit stuck on her back as well. I just think Alekseeva's just the better fighter, multiple paths to victory, could win on the feet, could win within the wrestling and grappling. And whichever way this fight goes, I just think Alekseeva's got the upper hand. So for those reasons, I'm picking Irina Alekseeva to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tagir Ulanbekov versus Azat Maksum. Now, when I started looking into this fight, originally we were supposed to have Ulanbekov versus Kyoji Horiguchi, by the way, which would have been an absolutely sick fight. And gutted that Horiguchi is pulled out of that. Again, another UFC stint for Horiguchi is definitely on the horizon. But yeah, devastated that fight got pulled. That would have been an insane fight. Now, in comes Azat Maksum. Now, when I first started looking into this fight, I thought, you know what, Maksum's a decent size underdog here. I know he's got a good style, likes to wrestle, can strike as well, but he's got one of, the fastest double leg takedowns, one of the fastest I've ever seen in the sport. Like, super, super quick takedowns, real good wrestler. But the more I looked into the fight, the more I just thought, this is a nightmare opponent for Azat Maksum. Like Tagir Ulanbekov, it's very, very difficult to get the better of him when you're wrestling. And then even with the striking, like Ulanbekov's developed as well. Like when he came into the UFC, he was in a couple of close fights, back and forth fights, and eking out decisions. But Ulanbekov's like, he's for me, he's really developed as a fighter, and he's becoming super dominant. Like, look what he did to Cody Durden. Like, yeah, Cody Durden has just been knocked out in his last fight, but the way that Ulanbekov like handled a Durden that was on a big win streak, that was taking out everybody that he was fighting, and when it came to the wrestling and grappling, Ulanbekov just displayed a different level. And I think that's what's going to happen here. I think for Azat Maksum to win this fight, he's got to be shooting takedowns on Ulanbekov, but again, there's just levels to this, and I think Ulanbekov's just levels above Maksum when it comes to the wrestling and grappling. Super strong for the division as well. And like I say, I just don't see Maksum. Like, Maksum's win condition is the wrestling here, but I just don't see him outworking Ulanbekov from a wrestling perspective, even if he gets the fight down. Like, Ulanbekov will get back up to his feet. He can then shoot his own takedowns. And what's Maksum going to look like off his back with Ulanbekov on top? Like I say, I think it's going to be a levels type of display. I think Maksum has definitely got wins in him in the UFC for sure, but I just don't think any of them wins are going to be an Ulanbekov. I think Ulanbekov's going to hit him hard on the feet. It's going to force Maksum to shoot, and from there, Ulanbekov, I think, can just manage the fight, deal with the takedowns, sprawl, reverse, use the fact that Maksum's closed the distance on him to defend a takedown, get a hold of a leg himself, and then get Maksum down. I just think it's a real problematic stylistic fight for Maksum, and I just don't see Ulanbekov losing it. For those reasons, I'm picking Tagir Ulanbekov to win this fight. And in the next fight, the last fight to break down, we've got Muhammad Usman versus Hamdi Abdelwahab. Now, I just think this is a real close fight. Like, it's, again, no disrespect intended. They're both absolutely UFC caliber fighters with really good styles themselves, but it is towards the lower end of the UFC heavyweight division. And I just think that it's going to be super close. Like, Hamdi Abdelwahab's got this, Egyptian Olympic wrestling background, and he can definitely wrestle. Like, you can see he's a good wrestler, but because they're heavyweights and he doesn't have the best cardio, you can't overcommit to the wrestling. So he'll get a couple of takedowns throughout the fight, and he can be okay on top in regards to being heavy. And I say this all the time, when in the heavyweight division, when one 265-pound man is on top of the other 265-pound man, even though they're the same weight, like the pressure from the top side, it just causes problems for the fighter on bottom to be able to get back up to the feet unless they're really well drilled in regards to standing back up against other heavyweights that are on top of them. So if they've got big heavyweight training partners and they're working this constantly and they're going through the motions of drilling and getting back up with something heavy on top of them, then, or you're a really legitimate, BJJ player, then, that's fine. But just for your average UFC heavyweight fighter with a 265-pound man on top of you, he's going to be tough. So, look, Hamdi Abdelwahab's got his win conditions in this fight, but I think Muhammad Usman has as well. Like, I don't think that Hamdi's striking is that effective. He's been landed on by lesser strikers than a Muhammad Usman, in my opinion. Usman does do a good job of landing big punches. He's not overly active in regards to his volume, but he does throw hard. He does land effectively, and I think from a striking perspective, Usman's going to be the better striker in this fight. And then when it comes to the wrestling, so again, Abdelwahab, in my opinion, could get takedowns here, but Usman's also not a bad defensive wrestler either. And especially if he's landing big shots on Hamdi, when Hamdi comes forwards, he doesn't have like crazy erratic fast movement. He comes forward in straight lines, head stays on the center line, and I think even just a simple jab's going to be there for anybody that fights Hamdi. But with Usman landing hard punches, I'm not sure how often Hamdi can close the distance effectively and get a hold of Usman. And if he does, he might get a takedown or two along the way, but I think Usman will do a good job of making Hamdi work for the takedowns, which is then going to deplete the gas tank. Then if this becomes a gas tank war between Usman and Hamdi, I think Usman's got the better gas tank and can also fight through an empty gas tank more efficiently than Hamdi can as well. Like, we've seen Usman tired, but he just finds the way to work. Like, his nickname's the Motta, and I think it's so fitting for him because the motor just keeps ticking along even when he's tired, whereas Hamdi just, like, not shuts down as in he can't function, but man, like just everything stops. The offense stops. The defense becomes super open. So I think that Hamdi's got the biggest gap in skill here in regards to the wrestling. But again, I don't think the weight division, coupled with the cardio, allows Hamdi to be too successful with wrestling heavily. And if he does, he might be okay early, but he's just going to gas himself out late, and Usman would be able to get him late, in my opinion. So I'm actually siding with Usman here. Admittedly, I've been a fan of Usman since he's come into the UFC. I was probably on an island of my own when he knocked out Zach Pauga. Everyone had Pauga as a massive favourite. I had Usman as a massive underdog. And yeah, Usman was losing that fight, but the win condition hit. And, you know, I've liked Usman. I've won money on Usman. I've lost a little bit of money on Usman. I had him against Mick Parkin, where, again, look at that fight. Like, Mick Parkin has come on massively in the UFC, and Usman went so close with him. And now you've got a Hamdi Abdelwahab that's going close with the Jamal Pogues. Like, you look at Pogues and Parkin, ironically, those two have fought as well, and Parkin beat Pogues comfortably. So, again, a lot of MMA math that I've just described there, which, you know, doesn't account for too much, but I just think Usman's got a good win condition here, and he's the underdog as well. I kind of feel like this probably should be a -110 pick'em at the very least. -110, -115 pick'em at the very least. But yeah, look, I'm going Usman here. I'm picking Muhammad Usman to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for everybody tuning in, whether you're on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or whether you're on YouTube as well. If you are on YouTube, please do me a couple of favors. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really helps us, the algorithms. It helps us grow the channel. It doesn't cost you anything, and you get email notifications every week when a video is uploaded. And of course, reply to the video as well. Drop something in the comments. Tell me where we agree. Tell me where we disagree. Tell me who you're betting on. Tell me who you're excited to see. Talk about Tofiq Musayev. Do you know something I don't know about Musayev? Like I said, there was a lot of sort of unknowns there. There's also unknowns with Kuniev as well about what he's gonna look like on the scales. What do you think he's gonna look like on the scales? It's me that gets to the replies. I'll always, through the busy week, try and get back to every single person that comments. So drop a comment. Again, it helps the algorithms, it helps the channel, and we really appreciate it. And finally, one last time before we wrap up, if you want to get into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler. We've also got Blaydes AI coupled with the handicapper betting advice in every single betting subscription package. It's just $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for an entire year, which is by far the value pack from MMA Play 365. Everything's super affordable, so you can make your money back as quick as possible with what you spend with us, so you can start profiting on your bets. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.